Welcome to the Hope and Focus podcast, where hope has a voice. We highlight the journeys of those impacted by Leber congenital amaurosis and other inherited retinal diseases, and the work driving change. Thanks for being here.
Welcome, everyone, to the inaugural Hope and Focus podcast. I'm your host, Ben Shaberman. I'm VP of Science Communications with the Foundation Fighting Blindness, and I'm also an advisor to Hope and Focus. And we are delighted to bring you this new podcast with conversations about the LCA journey. We'll have updates on research, discussions with unique and influential personalities, and much more. And for this first episode, I am excited and honored to chat with two of the most passionate and influential parents in the LCA community. So first, I'd like to welcome Laura Manfre, who founded Sophia Sees Hope in 2014 with her husband, Chuck Priebe, after their daughter, Sophia, was diagnosed with LCA. And fairly recently, Sophia Sees Hope was renamed Hope and Focus. Laura is also a board director for the Foundation Fighting Blindness. And on top of that, she has a day job. She works as the learning programs team lead in strategy and business operations for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Services. So, Laura, thanks for all you do and for launching the podcast and having me as the host. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Ben. Happy to be here.
And next up, I am delighted to welcome David Brint. David served as board chair of the Foundation Fighting Blindness for 8 years before handing over the reins in July 2024 to Karen Petru. He'd been on the board of the foundation for many, many years prior. David and his wife, Betsy, also founded the Foundation for Retinal Research several years ago when their son, Alan, was diagnosed with LCA. And then when David joined the foundation board as chair, the Foundation for Retinal Research was rolled into FFB. David also has a day job. He's the co-founder and principal at Brint Enterprises, which is a real estate company that leverages public and private resources for the development of affordable housing. So, David, thanks for all you've done to the LCA community and taking time to be with us on the podcast.
My pleasure. Always nice to be with you, Ben.
Same here, David. Well, it's wonderful to be with you both. And to start, I'd like you to both share what it was like as parents and families to learn that your young children had significant vision loss, and then you went on the diagnostic journey. What was it like to figure out the cause of their vision loss? And Laura, can you go first and tell us about those experiences?
Yeah, sure. I would say it was, looking back, it was devastating, honestly, and it unfolded over time, right? So first we knew something was wrong with her eyes and she would just need some glasses. And then they said, well, it looks like it's not just, sort of regular, nearsightedness or farsighted. There's something else going on. So then we went through a whole bunch of different tests looking for brain tumors, looking for all these other things that it could be. So went through this range of emotions and concerns and saw neuro ophthalmologists and MRIs. And so it wasn't easy. It took several years, actually. And we did finally get a clinical diagnosis that went a little bit like this. We think it's LCA, but it could be cone rod dystrophy. Maybe it's Stargardt's, but it doesn't really look like that. We're not sure, but it's probably LCA, right? So that was our clinical diagnosis after a couple of years. And then we're told to try and find get a genetic diagnosis. That was the only way to really confirm what exactly our daughter had and figure out what the future would look like for her. That took us about 7 years to get an accurate genetic diagnosis. And with that genetic diagnosis, we confirmed, yes, it's LCA. We know what that gene mutation is for her. And now we have a much more clear vision of what her treatment options may be like in the future. But also what was really important to us when we got that is, as with some of the other LCA genes, it's not just, she won't just go blind, right? We also have to screen for kidney failure. So one of the things that is always first and foremost in my mind when talking to other LCA families is that genetic diagnosis is so important because some of these genes carry other issues with them, right? In our case, it's renal retinal. So fortunately, it hasn't been an issue for us, but it took us a long time. We spent personal money. Insurance sometimes covered the genetic testing and sometimes it didn't. We sent blood work to Estonia. We went to Philadelphia. We went to Boston. And actually, it's because of David that I think we finally did get a genetic diagnosis because we were at this point where, like, how many more tests can we do? How many more times can I take her for blood work? And again, I'm going back some years. This is much, much easier now for families, especially thanks to programs at the Foundation Fighting Blindness. But back then, it was hard. It was hard and it was expensive. And it was because I sort of grabbed David at a conference for LCA and said, hey, we've been to all these places. We still don't have a genetic diagnosis. What do we do? And he sort of said, go here, try again. Everything's, changing. It's much easier now. And so we did. But without that push, honestly, David, I don't know how much longer we would have kept trying. So, that's kind of the reason also we have Hope and Focus now. We want people to sort of keep advancing and keep trying. But that was how our journey started. It was long, but we got a genetic diagnosis and moving forward from there.
And just for a little context, when did that journey begin? I know Sophia is in college.
Yeah,
Or did she graduate or?
now and just graduated. Yep. So that journey began when she was 2. She was born with some vision, so we didn't really notice that anything was wrong until she got to be a little more mobile, right? And started moving around and would walk into trees or fall downstairs, or if the ground changed color, she would get down and make sure it wasn't a change. There wasn't a drop off. It was maybe just a change in color on the carpet. They're like, something's going on here. So that our journey pretty much started when she was 2, and we did not get a genetic diagnosis for her until she was 12.
Right. And one other question before we chat with David about his family's journey. Is Sophia your oldest?
She's not. She's our middle child. So she has an older
Okay.
brother who's almost 2 years older. And then Sophia,
Okay.
we have a little bit of a gap, and we had another boy. So she's the middle child.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So David, your journey started quite a while back. Can you talk about what that was like for you and your wife, Betsy?
Sure. I mean, it's just when you mentioned that about the clinical diagnosis, about the genetic diagnosis, I realized that I was thinking, well, I'm so much older than you are, and so it happened so much longer and much before. But it was only 7 years, really, in the scheme of things, that when Alan was diagnosed, compared to when Sophia was diagnosed. When Alan was diagnosed, we were in the Stone Age. There wasn't internet. And so there was no real way of going online and, finding out all the medical information. I went to the Northwestern Library and, the old Dewey Decimal System, pulled out any article on something called Leber's, and ended up reading a lot about Leber's hereditary apathy, or not LCA, and because there wasn't a lot written about it. But over the course of time back then, there wasn't a lot. There were 2 genes that were known. There was a lot of hope, and there was research going on, but there wasn't that much. So when we received the diagnosis from our ophthalmologist, he basically said, your son's blind, he'll never see. Here's a card to the Chicago Lighthouse, and you don't really have to come back. That was the message, and that was pretty much it. It took a long time to have that settle in. My wife even said, I'd never met a blind person before, which was pretty stunning, but that's the way we felt. And now all of a sudden, just like so many other families were, how do you raise a blind kid? What do you do? And what happens? Just a million different questions and concerns, and then all of your dreams and visions, which are not realistic to begin with, because when you have other children, you realize that they grow up and they're different than you'd ever imagined anyway, in lots of really good ways and some ways that are more challenging. But in our son Alan's case, it was a challenge because the development of visually impaired children is different than sighted children. We had to learn all that. So that was really what our initial part of our journey was.
Right. And Alan was born with virtually no vision. Is that correct?
Alan had light perception. So
Okay.
he knew it was day and night. He could see a light. I mean, actually, he would sit and look at his head would look up to the ceiling when there was a light there, so that he could see it. He was attracted to it. But that was it.
Right, right. And Laura used the word devastating when she and Chuck first figured out what was going on. Would you say that was the same experience for you and Betsy, or scary? How would you describe that initial realization?
Everybody's different. Betsy was a little more devastated. My father-in-law, who we're very close to, was off the walls, upset. I'm a little more even keeled. Like, I'm a problem solver. So, okay, so what do we do? Unfortunately, there was not much to do back then, but that was really what my view was. And, until I saw that he couldn't be raised and couldn't be normally, and it's not the first blind child. So I didn't get overly depressed. Certainly wasn't excited, but, I was concerned and, we had a lot to learn. Fortunately, my wife is a saint. She figured out most of the things. We sort of split responsibilities. I really went towards research and see what we could do to move the field along, and she went towards development, education, and they divided and conquered.
David went to the library and used the Dewey Decimal System.
Exactly. And came home and she said, "What'd you find out?" I'm like, "I have no idea. I didn't understand any of that stuff." No, not quite that bad, but pretty bad.
And maybe shocked is a better word, but not shocked, it was a struggle. And for us, it was sort of this unfolding, right? Because she did have sight. She was using it. So
Yeah.
so it was like an unfolding emotion of just, like, and it's interesting because obviously I'm not devastated now any more than any of my 3 children devastate me on a daily basis. But they, even now as she's an adult now, she's a young adult, but every single year, like month to month, different challenges, whether it's her peers are driving or, she's always taken ballet. And then we get to like a certain point with that. And because her vision was changing and she was maturing and the world around her is changing, like it was just this constant, I don't know if you found this here, but it was this constant having to adjust expectations and, as a parent, and also having to support your child, I think, a little differently in this environment that's changing, especially for Sophia with her changing vision in a way that she couldn't anticipate. We didn't know how to anticipate. And I think that was also a little harder on us, a little different from, maybe with the other kids that didn't have that added challenge.
Yeah, I wish I tell families this now. I wish I had done what I tell them, which is write down every beginning of every year where in your wildest dreams your visually impaired child would be at next year at this time, and see how close you come. Because I know that had I done that, he would have exceeded, my expectations, every year, and it would probably make me feel more comfortable. Now, it's still delayed because they're visually impaired kids are often a couple of years delayed emotionally and developmentally, but not way beyond what I thought could happen.
That's a great perspective. And how do you even set expectations? Because you're venturing into a world that you know so little about. What I'm curious about also is you both have other kids. And how did your family dynamics change? How did the other children kind of fit into the picture?
Maybe I'll take it first. I have an older daughter and an older son, and they sort of adopted him. My daughter mothered him, and my son beat him up. Brotherly fighting and arguing and all that stuff, and that was our family. That was our family unit, and they adapted probably better than we did in a lot of ways. And we were lucky that we had other kids. So, first of all, you said before, how'd you know what the expectations were? Well, when you've raised other kids, you sort of have not that you can remember, but you sort of have an idea of what things happen and when and what they do. And so you have an idea of what you'd like to see your son do or your daughter. So, for us, that was pretty optimistic to have that part of the family. It's a challenge because you're always adapting to the visually impaired kid, in some way or another. And sometimes the kids resent it. Sometimes they don't. It's just an ongoing process that we went through.
Right, right. How about for you, Laura, with
Yeah.
your family?
So we have a slightly different perspective, maybe from most families, in that my oldest, who is almost 2 years older than Sophia, we almost lost him at a couple years old. So I can just remember, as much as I say it was sort of devastating and shocking to get this diagnosis of her vision, I also had this track in my head going, well, hey, she's going to live. So I would say our whole perspective, that whole frame was very different because we almost lost our oldest. He lives with a very serious medical condition. He's living a full life. He's going to be great. He's healthy. You would never know that this had happened to him, but that was where we were at the time. So, for us, it was as upsetting as it was. I knew she was going to live. I knew she could, have a full life. And we maybe had a tiny bit more exposure to people with visual impairments, but really not much. So also I feel like David and Betsy, we never interacted one-on-one with anyone who was blind or visually impaired before. So that was new to us. But and then David, I think the same, as you experienced, the siblings just sort of take it in stride. I don't think they care. It doesn't matter. Your brother and sister, you're just going to treat them the way you were going to treat them anyways. As a family, though, I will say, Sophia and her older brother are very close in age. And then there is an 8-year gap before we had our son, Luca. So it was definitely of consideration to us, do we have another? And, what if, we have a second child and they're also visually impaired? And honestly, Sophia's great. So we went for it and had that third child. But it is something that we considered.
So in my notes, I wrote down a phrase, super advocates, which I think you both are. And part of the reason is not just because of your personalities and passion that I mentioned earlier, but you both decided to launch organizations of LCA families. And that's not for the faint at heart. And I guess first, what inspired you to create these organizations? I guess, David, why don't you go first? Because you were the first US LCA organization.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we Betsy and I split things up and we decided to create, vehicle to take donations really. And then it became clearer that there was no communication between LCA families around the world. The internet was just starting and the science community really hadn't evolved. We met a few prominent scientists and spoke to them about some things. And we said, okay, well, let's try this. And it was really grassroots. I mean, we started a scientific advisory board and we raised money. I mean, it wasn't a lot, a couple $100,000 a year minimum. And we held some conferences for the scientists and sort of said to them, okay, just tell us what you want to do. And you guys all agree that that makes sense and we'll fund it. And at the same time, we were looking at the families because, what Laura described and what I described is we didn't know what to do, and there was no communication. So we started having family conferences and, 200 or 300 families from around the world would come to a city and all the kids would get examined and have blood drawn. And so that was great for the researchers because they'd never seen that many LCA kids at once because it's so uncommon. And the families would interact and they'd talk about their experiences and what works and what doesn't. And the kids would have childcare. And, it was a real bonding thing because people came from all over the world. So that was exciting. And we kept doing that for, I don't know, 10 or 12 years. And through that evolutionary time that Laura was mentioning, where, things started happening, genes discovered, and some of it was from our funding. And, there's sort of nothing like having a family get told, okay, here's the gene and here's what we know about it. And so you've got a path. Up until then, you don't have any path. So that's what really started us. And then it became a family kind of thing. I mean, he knew all the kids, we know all the families. I'm not great with names, but one of the kids that was on America's Got Talent, he was a finalist on America's Got Talent. He ended up being treated for the RP65. And I remember walking by the television. I didn't even know why it was on because I didn't watch it. And I heard his voice and I went, wait a second, Betsy. And there he was. I mean, when he was a little baby, the little kid, he used to sing at the conference.
Yeah, Christian Bordino.
There you go.
Remember him? Yeah.
Thank you,
Yep.
Christian. Right.
Yep.
And so, and now all of a sudden, when I see him, when I saw him, it's like, oh, hi, Mr. Brint. What? How do you know that? But that was really rewarding back then. So that's why we did that, and it was a really interesting time.
Well, thank you. Thank you for doing that. I think it's so important to bring the families together. I had never gone to one of your conferences, but
Too young.
I've now been too young. But I have been to a couple Hope and Focus conferences. And for me, I focus a lot on research for my day job, obviously. But when I'm at a Hope and Focus conference, the families connecting, the kids, the parents, it's such a wonderful atmosphere. And I presume there's a similarity into the vibe at a Hope and Focus conference as there was with FRR. But Laura, did you decide to launch what is now Hope and Focus because FRR got wrapped into FFB? What inspired Hope and Focus?
So sure. So FRR is 100%, what David and Betsy Brint built is 100% our origin story. And I do hope that our conferences are like the ones that they hosted. I believe that they are. The kids all come out, sighted siblings and siblings with visual impairment see one another and see like families living like they do for, that's the only chance they really have to get together. And, there's always a box of tissue at every table and we're introducing them to researchers and all that. So yeah, I really hope that they are. Like that was the inspiration basically for Hope and Focus and our conferences. And then really specifically, we ended up incorporating because we went to those conferences, right? That's how I got to meet David. That's how I was directed where to go to get a genetic diagnosis that actually finally gave us a result. It was from the FRR, someone at the FRR, that once we got our genetic diagnosis, I will never forget, it was Sally. She said, whenever you get your diagnosis, call and let us know so we can introduce you to other families. And I called, I said, hey, we got our genetic diagnosis. I was really bummed because it was a renal retinal gene. It was a little more than we thought we were taking on, but okay. And she answered and said, congratulations, that's awesome. And I remember being like, this is really weird, but she's right. And then she asked us to raise funds. And we did. And that's how we got into the fundraising ourselves. And that's where we ended up then incorporating Hope and Focus. And when FRR, sort of rolled up into the Foundation Fighting Blindness, honestly, that was the best thing that could have happened for LCA and the LCA community from a research perspective, right? The Foundation Fighting Blindness has advanced this research and really just elevated everything that David and Betsy built. And that is why we have treatment on the market today. That's why there's more in clinical trials. Like, this is a very, very exciting time for our LCA community. It really is. And a lot of that is all because of David, Betsy, and the work of the Foundation Fighting Blindness. Then for Hope and Focus, on our little corner of the world, right, we can be that single, and we aspire and want to be that single disease organization, kind of bringing everyone in this community together to do more of that. I'll say that human touch, the warm fuzzies, right? So we kind of did step in and fill, I'd say, that void with the conferences that the FRR used to host. We now host them every other year and have programs to kind of connect people around around the country, also around the globe. So really that's our origin story. It came right out of the FRR and also the great work that the FFB is doing that allows us as Hope and Focus to really focus on the families and the support, more of the direct support and outreach.
Yeah, one
Right.
story I'll relate to you, which why what Laura and her group has done, which is so important, is that Paul Sieving, who was the director of the National Institute for a long time, he scolded me one day because I was so excited about the beginning of our work to get things into the clinic that it was too not advanced enough. But he also said, he goes, and do you know why a lot of the LCAs are what they're working on? And I said, why? He goes, because you organized that field and the researchers knew where the people were and that there was resources behind it. And, I didn't really want that to end. And so when Laura took this on, it continued. And so there's a real focus on all the LCAs. Now, remember, there's like 30 different genes that cause disease that are LCA. Almost all of them are ciliary. So they're in the same general vicinity, same mechanism. Some of the same, they affect the same mechanisms of action, the ability to get the outer segments to grow properly. So there's a lot of synergy when people are doing research. And so that was the best thing that happened when Focus continued, is that all of our organization, our attempt to organize everyone continued and got bigger and got better in a lot of ways, especially since there were things happening. There were things to talk about. There were, real life, there was technologies to talk about just to raise the kids, let alone the research. So it's really been a pleasure.
Yeah, and I like to think I knew all that when I got into this, David, but to be honest, I really didn't. Everything you just said has really also been an education for me as Hope and Focus has matured, right? Learning from industry and learning from the research community and understanding that we can't develop these treatments in a bubble. We have to develop them with the community that is affected by these diseases, right? Our voices need to be heard. We need to have an identified patient community. Our community needs to be registered and identifiable in my retina tracker or wherever their centers of excellence are, because without having that identified and access to that patient community, why would a researcher want to really get involved in it? And how will someone know that there's enough people to run a clinical trial, right? So really, really important that we continue to do this work and reach out to the community in order to advance the treatments.
Most definitely. And I'd say another powerful aspect to you bringing the communities together is that you're bringing the research community in with the patient community. And I think it's obviously powerful for the patients and families to meet the therapy developers, but it's a mutual thing. I think the scientists who are working in labs or in the clinic and doing their thing really are inspired when they come to a meeting and they meet the families and the kids, and not that they need a reminder of why they do what they do, but it just reinforces it that much more. You both given us a lot of insights into the journey. And as we sort of wind down here in our conversation, is there anything else either of you want to say to, let's say, a family that's kind of new to the journey? They've just had a child who's relatively young, recently diagnosed. Is there any insight that you haven't shared that you think is important for them to know?
To do was to recognize that I was needy. I needed people, and then to accept the fact that people wanted to help. They went out of their way to help. I stopped feeling guilty or embarrassed that they wanted to help me in some way. And I'm not just talking about contributing to the foundation. I mean, to come over and play with the baby, or to, give us the night off to do something, or whatever they offered to do. Lots of friends offered. And that's community. And people wanted to do that. They wanted to make sure that their friends, especially my wife, who's lovable, because knew that they were there for her and for us. That was a big deal to get comfortable with. The other thing is don't have to reinvent the wheel. A lot of people think, okay, I'm gonna I'm going to go find out everything there is to find out and, do all my research and, just start talking to other people, especially Laura. I mean, call Laura or call me and we'll start you on the right path and give you what you need. And then you can make decisions about how you want to get involved. But many people try to get, reinvent the wheel, and they spend years when they could spend weeks getting up to speed or understanding where the field is. Those are the two things that
I agree with all that. That was well said. My advice was going to be just a little shorter. It sucks. Just embrace the suck and know it's going to be okay. Honestly, that's sort of like been my mantra over the last 20 some years. It's hard. It's not what you would have wanted, but my daughter just graduated with 3 majors and, she's living a full life and it really is going to be okay.
she's pretty awesome.
That's amazing. 3 majors. I could barely handle one. What are the majors?
Yeah. The majors are peace studies, French, and sociology and anthropology, which is really like 2 shoved into one again. So if anyone needs any help in any of those areas or has a job for her, please also let me know. But yeah, she did a great job and she's looking forward to the next chapter.
Well, I really love the peace studies. We could use a little more knowledge about how to bring peace to so many aspects of our world. David, what's Alan up to in his life?
Alan works for the Chicago Lighthouse. He does vocational placement, so he works on finding jobs for people with disabilities and then helping train them to interview and do the jobs and work. And he absolutely loves it. He worked for me for a little while and hated it. Found a job that was more suited to them. But thank God for the folks at the Lighthouse for the great work they do. And that they've embraced him, and he's doing great. He lives on his own. He's still a pain in the ass. I mean, he's still my quirky son, but he's doing okay. There's certain things that he's trying to work on socially, and that's always a challenge. But I'd say 80% of his life is where he wants it right now. So, but that's not true with all of us. So.
Yeah, I was gonna say quirky, still trying to figure out your place in the world. Yeah, I'm a little older than your son, and I'm certainly trying to do that. So
I won't tell you what the quirks are, if that's there.
well, before we sign off here, one thing I feel compelled to do is to let our listeners know, first of all, about the Hope and Focus website, hopeandfocus.org, right?
Yep, Hope and
To
Focus.
learn more about Hope and Focus and what activities and resources are out there. And then I also want people to know about the Foundation Fighting Blindness, obviously, specifically our no-cost genetic testing program and our registry. Those are really important resources. And a vast majority of people or kids born with LCA now will get a genetic diagnosis pretty easily. I think it's in the 70% plus range for LCA. And so by going to fightingblindness.org, you can learn more about how to get that test, how to work with your doctor. And then again, people are put into a registry so they can be on the radar screen of researchers and clinical trial sponsors.
It's not just, I know we're talking a lot about young kids and families. When we were at, I think it was the Visions conference a couple of years ago, we had 3 LCA individuals, all over 40 years old, and they had all been misdiagnosed at some point in time and thought they had, I don't know what they were told they had, and every single one of them instead had an LCA gene. So they went back to that My Retina Tracker program and registry, and they got an accurate genetic diagnosis. Then it made a world of difference for them. So, and then they became part of the Hope and Focus LCA community as well as FFB, which is exciting for us. But it's, I know there's a lot of, we here in our social on Hope and Focus, there's a lot of adults living with LCA, clinically diagnosed, that still don't have a genetic diagnosis. So any age should be going back and getting diagnosed if they want to confirm and have more information.
Right. I'm so glad you said that because we've talked a lot about kids since you're both parents, but there are a lot of results, obviously, with LCA in this world doing amazing things and can help others on their journey. So
Yep.
thanks again for sharing that. David and Laura, it's been a lot of fun talking to you, learning so much about your journeys, your kids, and about the LCA community. And thank you for all you've done and for taking some time out of your busy day to tell us about what you've learned and trying to help families move forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Happy to.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Dave.
Laura, keep up the good work. See you soon.
Thank you.
Whether you live with vision loss or love someone who does, this space is for you. To learn more about Hope and Focus and join us in advancing treatments for LCA, visit hopeandfocus.org and connect with us on social media @HopeandFocus1. Together, we are bringing hope into focus.